I just tell them that I can't.
Now we're live. Okay, we're live now.
Okay. Well, let's check.
Ben, if you want to take it away with your presentation.
Sure. Yeah, so I can't speak as detailed to the history of it as Senator Sears can. But I guess, part of what justice reinvestment is it's really a data-driven approach to improve public safety, reduce corrections and related criminal justice spending, and reinvest savings in strategies that can increase crime, reduce recidivism. It's primarily funded by DOJ's Bureau of Justice Assistance and has additional fund Pew Charitable Trust. And as Senator Sears said, the first round was in 2008, and at the forefront was Act 179, and it created administrative probation for qualifying offenses, and those would be things like retail theft, driving with a suspended license, lawful mischief, first offense of possession, increased access to community-based substance addiction treatment programs. It focused supervision resources on people most likely to reoffend. It actually created.
Can I pause you for one quick second? Peggy, is it possible for us to get that presentation on the screen too?
Right now, to be honest with you, it probably would be very difficult.
Okay,
only because what's going on.
right.
Is this what you're looking for?
That would be great.
Yes.
Oh, well, these are just my.
Oh, those are your.
Oh,
Okay.
Sorry, I normally could,
Okay,
but
no
I
worries.
have some stuff going on
No,
here.
no problem.
I mean, I could probably refashion them and distribute them, but
Thanks.
but I can also put this in an email to all of you after if you want to just for reference. I was just Senator Sears going over sort of the history, a little bit of the bills that had started to pass, but if you want to.
Well, I just want to mention that there is a bill that I think is ready for sign up, and anybody who wishes to sign on to it it's the next justice reinvestment bill, which is has to do with probation. You may want to do that after or before or anything, but I'd offer that. It's the next step at trying to reduce the population and increase the.
Yeah, your prerogative.
Well, maybe if you kind of went over what we did last year.
Okay.
And then talk about the bills for this year.
Sure.
And offer anybody, Senator Baruth's been through them because he's on the Justice Oversight Committee. And so we went through most of this this fall, but.
Sure, that'd be great. I had started going over 2008 and sort of what that act did. I can continue there if you want me to fast forward.
I just want the newer members of the committee to understand, because a lot of what we do in terms of trying to reduce the prison population is related to justice reinvestment. There's obviously other things that we'll be doing and other bills that committee members have introduced that will look at the same issues, but doesn't mean we're not going to take them up. But I just wanted to everybody understand justice reinvestment, what it does and what it doesn't do.
Of course. So I'll continue on with Act 179 of 08. So it increased access to community-based substance addiction treatment programs. It focused supervision resources for people most likely to offend. It actually created electronic and GPS monitoring for the first time in the state, and expanded transitional housing opportunities and job training programs for those people that were being released and reintegrated to the community. Going forward. So as Senator Sears said, there was sort of a lull in the 2010s, and then in 2020 there was Act 148, and this really was a very large initiative, and it created presumptive parole by establishing an avenue for certain people to be eligible for parole consideration prior to reaching their minimum sentence. Parole is the release prior to an end of an offender's sentence, subject to certain conditions for their release. And within presumptive parole, it created 2 tiers that were rolled out over 3 years. And it sets up a system of administrative review for all presumptive parole cases prior to release. It also streamlined the furlough system. It reduced furlough to 3 statuses. One, which is temporary furlough, so that would be furlough for a defined period of purpose, like for an incarcerated individual to go and visit a sick relative. It created treatment furlough, which would be someone who's subject to sentence, but it was required that they went to a treatment facility. And then 3, which is community supervision furlough, which is when someone would be released into the community to participate in a reentry program. It repealed reintegration furlough, furlough without approved housing, treatment furlough for low-risk individuals, and treatment furlough for people with specific DUI convictions. And those were effective immediately upon passage.
Can you explain a little bit about what the data showed in terms of the revocations of furlough, which was the reason that the justice reinvestment process forced us to look at furloughs?
Yeah, so of all of the, I guess, revocations or suspensions where people were brought back in, furlough was the greatest indicator of all the various reasons. So violations, parole, probation, furlough. Furlough was the highest rate of people being brought back in to prison. And since this has been rolled out, the data is still being compiled, and there was, COVID kind of threw a wrench in the whole gears as far as being able to really see what the true data was. But since it's been done, furlough revocations have been reduced, I want to say by 30% roughly. So it really has had an effect addressing furlough specifically, but everything is down. Furlough just is the most significant indicator so far. And with Act 148 going on, it changed good time or earned good time, which is basically it allows incarcerated people to earn 7 days off their minimum sentence. It was previously 5 days for every month they are incarcerated without a major disciplinary rule violation, and remove the requirement that a person participate in DOC recommended programming to earn good time. So it helps shave off the time served potentially. It required stakeholders to develop recommendations regarding racial and geographic sentencing and report to standing committees, which is sort of how we've kept on monitoring justice reinvestment. It directed the parole board to report to standing committees on administrative burdens of the new presumptive parole policy and any anticipated challenges. And then it created a Justice Reinvestment 2 working group, which has continued to monitor, and they just reported to Justice Oversight last year in December, and then an update on the monitoring just this past December as well. I guess it would have been December of 2021 and December of 2022. And then finally, moving forward to 2021, there were a couple of acts that passed that addressed it. There was Act 14, which eliminated the use of risk assessments in most cases, made need screenings and other free child services available to all offenders who are charged as juveniles, regardless of age. And it created a pilot project for DOC to provide the court system with a report prior to sentencing defendants to probation for felonies. There was also Act 24, which provided for the presumptive release of certain probationers at the midpoint of their probation term. So this is commonly known as a midpoint review. And they would be released if they didn't pose a risk to the community or to the victim, and if they were compliant with the risk reduction and rehabilitative programming required as part of their probation conditions. And then this amended the midpoint probation review established originally under a different act in JR1. And then last year, there was Act 142, and this is really the data collection aspect of all of this when it comes to racial justice statistics. So this created the Division of Racial Justice Statistics within the Office of Racial Equity, and the role is to collect and analyze data related to systemic racial bias and disparities within the criminal and juvenile justice systems. It created the Justice Statistics Advisory Council within the Office of Racial Equity, basically that serves in an advisory capacity to evaluate these statistics and provide recommendations. That panel will sunset, I think, in a few years once everything kind of gets up and running. There was also an initiative that failed last year in H505. This was another recommendation of CSG, which was it proposed to reclassify penalties for unlawfully possessing and dispensing and selling regulated drugs. It also combined criminal penalties for heroin and fentanyl offenses, or a combination of the two, and established other statutory changes to mens rea, the mental element of the crimes. So that did pass both the House and the Senate, but was ultimately vetoed by Governor Scott. And then this year, as Senator Sears alluded to, there is a bill to establish presumptive probation. So presumptive parole, which was already established, is on the back end. Once someone is sentenced, presumptive probation would really be a suspension of that sentence altogether, where someone would go onto probation immediately for certain low non-violent misdemeanors and felonies. So specifically what that would do is that it would, so for those offenses, it would establish a presumption that probation is the way to go. But the presumption could be rebutted by the prosecutor. So the bill would permit the prosecutor to file a motion and present evidence to rebut that presumption and argue for an alternative sentence pursuant to 13 VSA 7030. So those could be an actual sentence of incarceration. It could be a deferred sentence. It could also be a rehabilitative board. But what this would do is it'd say a rehabilitative board would not, on its own, would not be a sufficient alternative sentence. It would also provide the defendant the ability to present evidence on their behalf, arguing for presumptive probation. And then the court would have to consider certain factors in making the decision. One would be whether or not the offense was committed with the use of a dangerous weapon, whether the person used threats or coercion in the commission of the offense, and the age and vulnerability of the victim, whether the person was in a position of responsibility or trust over the victim, or whether the person abused a public position of trust or responsibility. And then depending on what the court ruled, the decision would be appealable directly to the Supreme Court.
That's the bill is introduced, so obviously the committee will work on it. There may be changes.
Right. And there's also the reporting requirement bill too, that
On the justice is coming.
yeah, that would essentially just, there already is a requirement that Justice Reinvestment 2 initiatives, expenditures are reported. It will begin, it's supposed to be annually on January 15th, where the Commissioners of Corrections, Health, Mental Health, and for Children and Families, along with the Attorney General, must report to the standing committees about these expenditures. Specifically, it must detail programming on domestic violence interventions, offender transitional housing capacity, of the offender management system for DOC, community-based mental health and substance use services, and diversion and restorative justice programs like community justice centers and DCS barge program. What the bill would do, in addition to those already existing reporting requirements, is add an assessment of these expenditures. Basically, are they being effective in reducing crime and recidivism? And if they aren't, why not? It would include data related to recidivism rates, violations of conditions of release, probation, parole, furlough, and whether any new offenses have occurred for these individuals. And it would also classify the violations as civil or criminal nature to help the standing committees, exactly understand the nature of these violations. So those are the two initiatives in the Senate, and there may be some others in the House.
As mentioned, that the Justice Center does work with us. The funding for the Justice Center is through the United States Bureau of Justice mainly, and other charitable foundations. But they, I think we provide a small stipend to them when they work here. But we're lucky that one of the people who works for the Justice Center lives in Addison County. And so she's frequently likes to come over the Gap and visit with us, and has been very helpful. And another is from Connecticut. So they don't necessarily, the offices are in New York, Seattle, and Austin, Texas, and Washington, D.C. But they don't, the staff members don't necessarily live there. They live all over the country. I thought, Peggy, did you hand out this document? Yeah, going to your question, page 27 of
It's also on the website.
the document, it talks about some of the issues regarding that they found in the working group in the report of 2021 regarding mental health, substance sharing information, community-based providers. I think it's really exactly what we're coming from. Some of the recommendations.
Senator, do you want me to go into the out-of-state funding a bit more, or, you know, like I could talk specific numbers from last year, from this year?
Yeah, I mean, one of the odd things about this, that we're lucky in it, we can identify the money saved because they're out of state. Right? So each bed out of state results in a certain amount of savings that you reduce. Other states are finding the money, you know, looking at the overall spending.
Yeah, and over the last couple of years, last year, I believe there was 417,000 worth of out-of-state bed savings. That was rolled into, I believe, the Budget Adjustment Act. Could have been a big bill too. And that is, again, brought, you know, spent on those transitional housing services, substance abuse prevention. Most recently, there was a tremendous amount of savings. I believe approximately 1.9 million worth of out-of-state bed savings. And there was 300,000 or up to 290,000 that was allocated to, or was already appropriated, but reapproved for DOC to use to update their offender management system, as we discussed before. And I can actually go into what exactly those improvements were, if the committee would like.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful.
Yeah, so basically, they wanted to, it was one, on the one hand, it would create this digital intelligence overlay system. And what this would do is that it would help them monitor the justice reinvestment recommendations and outcomes. It would help with creating a seamless supervision system between the institutions and the community, the people that are released into the community, but also the community partners. There would be collaboration and information sharing between DOC and community providers. It would improve data collection and data measures and outcome measurement. So this theoretically should help with what's proposed in the reporting bill this year, where it would help assess the effectiveness of spending. It would also help with individualized rehabilitative case planning. So each person subject to the custody of DOC would have this personalized case plan that would be more accessible. It would improve classification of people as high risk, low risk, moderate risk, so that their recommendations and their level of supervision could be more tailored to the individual. And it would also modernize risk and needs assessment tool systems and processes. So it's really, I think, for lack of better terms, trying to modernize the supervision system for DOC, to really leverage technology as opposed to kind of paper and meetings and really streamline those things. So that was up to $290,000. Another $350,000 was approved for the Vermont network to use for various programs. And programs that the network use, a lot of it is, based on their mission, which is domestic violence prevention and programming. There's specifically their accountability programs. And then what this would do, it would help certify an additional 5 to 10 new community-based treatment programs throughout the state. It would help them transition to a robust participant-level data collection system, allowing them to track outcomes of programming. So again, you're kind of seeing a theme here about monitoring, tracking, so that they can really assess these things. And then developing statewide resources to respond to the risks and needs of people who cause harm, including culturally specific programming and the exploration of a statewide preventative warm line for people who are subject to violence in their relationships. So there is an additional approximate 1.3 that has not been reapproved, that I believe is going through the budget adjustment process right now. So there still is a significant amount of savings that can be used for these.
One of the interesting notes on that is that prior to this, the offenders themselves were being charged a fee to go to the domestic violence programs, which many of them couldn't afford, or if they did, it wasn't a priority, I guess. And so they weren't paying the fee, and then the fee became the problem. By funding it this way, it was a recommendation of both the network as well as the DOC and others. So funding it through justice reinvestment savings avoids the problem, really. I mean, one could argue that they should be paying, but you don't have the money.
Yeah, and we know poverty is highly linked to.
Especially if you're coming out of jail, you may not have that money.
Yeah, so that's the funding aspect, and really, it's when you think about these out-of-state bed savings over the course of the program is really successful. There shouldn't be any savings left. If it's really, because you're not going to be sending people out of state, because there's not going to be the need to send people out of state, because the programs and these initiatives are being effective to keep people out of prison. So that's sort of the goal in the long run, I suppose.
So can I the out-of-state bed savings, that's money we save by sending people out of state, yes?
No, when they aren't.
Bringing them back, okay. I just wanted to clarify that. I am also wondering, do we track, I assume that it is less expensive to have someone in the community, under community supervision than it is to have someone incarcerated. Do we track that savings?
It's a good question.
Not really.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, the Department of Corrections may have some information related to that, but I'm not aware of any right now.
In terms of justice reinvestment, we've just looked at out-of-bed savings because it's easy to identify. So, for example, if you were to reduce the women's population from, say, I don't know what it is today, let's just say it's 100, and we reduced it to 50, there may be no savings, because you still have staff, you still have facility, et cetera. With the out-of-state beds, it's easy because we're not paying the bill to CoreCivic, whatever the name of the company is now. So we haven't tracked the savings from reduction. Women's just the easiest because they're in one facility. But I think at some point we should be doing that as well, because it is cheaper, obviously, than in most cases to supervise in the community.
I mean, if we reduce if what comes to pass, hopefully we get to that point where we have no one out of state and that is neutral, but I think there will likely still be savings. So I think that I would agree with you that would be important to track as well and reinvest in continuing to build better systems.
So, Senator Sears, without having the opportunity to look at this, are the money figures in this report? as far as cost of a detainee over the period of a year?
Not in this report, no. They're in the Budget Adjustment Act, from last year, and they're in budget from, I think they'll be in the governor's budget this,
Yeah,
when he releases it.
so Senator North, are you speaking specifically just about each year's out-of-state bed savings?
I'm not talking about total. What I'm looking at is, what does it cost taxpayers, whatever else, to incarcerate one individual for a 365-day period?
Out of state is almost 30,000.
Yeah, it's around there. But I don't have the information on top of my head.
I think we all can get behind lowering our incarceration rate by all means and offering those programs to keep recidivism and lowering that in the process. I'm just curious as
I
to.
think it's about 30,000, and we'll get the actual figure. I think the contract's about 30,000 per bed out of state. And there's a little wrinkle here that most people are not aware of, but we do rent beds to the federal government.
In the state.
Right.
About 50, or they're all in your,
They're all in St. Albans now, yes, and it's a fluctuating figure as far as availability, depending on the incarceration rate of what they, but beds have, it was 40, 50 beds. I don't know.
feds pay more.
Yep.
Correct. Than we spend out of state. So,
So the federal government is giving us more than $30,000
yeah, they're giving
to
us, I think,
house federal
50,000.
prisoners in Vermont. 50,000, so
I think it's around that. I'm not sure.
I don't have the number breakdown from out of state versus in-state, but I'm looking, and I can send this to Peggy to put up on the committee page, but I'm looking at the Vera Institute, and they are saying that it costs on average $57,615 to incarcerate an individual
That's
in
the
Vermont.
in-state.
So I'm sorry.
57,615, which says it's the average, so my guess is that's the average between in-state and out-of-state, because I thought we were closer to 66,000, which is probably the in-state, and then you average it with the out-of-state 30. And like I said, I'll send this to Peggy so she can put it up on the committee page.
Because I don't know if this is the time, I'm sure we're going to be going over this presumptive probation or whatever else is. I was just curious if this is not the time, that's fine. It's as far as DOC being able to handle a probationary level. The more people we don't incarcerate and are under probation, I would assume they can only handle so many cases at one time. We're looking at the possibility of actually increasing employee within, and what the cost, entry level cost of that would be versus.
Well, and Commissioner Demmel has, briefed the Justice Oversight Committee about their recruitment efforts and, staffing challenges, and Steve Howard from the Vermont State Employees Association as well has testified to that. From that testimony, there are difficulties in recruiting, but Commissioner Demmel has testified to an increase in recruitment. There have been initiatives to, I guess, what you could consider increasing work-life balance for corrections officers, but it's very much I would consider a newer initiative that is still trying to take hold. But as far as the supervision of these potential probationers, that OMS system, I think, is an assistance, but also while they're under the custody or supervision of DOC, they're engaging with various community partners in whatever the conditions of their probation could be. And so that's sort of where we get into what those, alternatives to incarceration are, be it diversion, be it treatment, be it the COSA program within DOC, circles of support, and also others like youth assisted substance abuse programs, Tamarack, and I can go into
Well, that's the next agenda item right after the break.
Yeah.
You want to You're ruining your,
Jumping the gun a
you're
little bit.
jumping the gun a little bit.
Yeah.
But I do think the questions are good because we can get to, once the budget has been presented, we can get the information. DOC, maybe we should, when's the governor's budget speech? Is that next week?
It's the 20th, next Friday at 1 o'clock.
We should probably have Commissioner Corrections in after the budget speech to talk about the budget adjustment, where, and any budget issues. So if you could arrange that, whatever.
The week after.
Well, yeah, he can't talk about it until the governor's presented. It's a strange, it always struck me as strange that they can't talk about it until the governor's presented. Orders. But yeah, that's the conversation. And I mean, that was basically the reason that Justice Reinvestment and the Justice Center got founded, I think, was that so many states were spending so much money on corrections. What were they getting for their dollar? And it wasn't, they're not particularly great results. We did a recidivism thing at the Justice Center. 50 states sent people to talk about recidivism. Most people have no definition of recidivism. And they're very, yet people were using figures like 50% recidivism, but they were based on, standard around the country. And it didn't look at, who it was that was in that group of most likely to recidivate. And what they found was that low-level offenders who end up getting incarcerated usually end up recidivating, worse than they did before they were incarcerated. In other words, the results are exactly the opposite of what we wanted. That's part of what led to some of these reforms, to try to use alternatives to incarceration. And I got my constituency who saying, well, the pain in the neck lock him up, that'll teach him, unfortunately.
Data bears out that just doesn't work.
Well, yeah, but it's hard to prove that unless you have the data.
And that's, especially with the bill last year, establishing the Division of Racial Statistics. I mean, it's going to take a little bit of time. And really what it's supposed to do is try and streamline all the data across the various agencies to try to compile it to really open a lens into these initiatives' effectiveness on people of color and other minority populations.
Well, I think one of the surprises of the data collection was that it was not necessarily people of color from other states. It was people, who were being incarcerated at a higher rate. It was people from this state, of color, who were being incarcerated at a higher rate. That was not actually a surprise to most of us, I think, because we relied on the anecdotal.
And so these initiatives are still, they're only a couple of years old. And so there's some time sort of for implementation, assess effectiveness, but steps are being taken to do that. Here as well.
Is there a due date for when these reports might be issued? Sorry if you already mentioned that.
So with the JR2, the expenditure report, that's January 15th of each year. And this is, I think, the first year that there should be a report from those various commissioners on it. And the report would go to this committee, the Appropriations Committee, both the Senate and the House Corrections and Institutions. And then also on the racial justice side, they have reporting requirements. And I want to say that the first report for them was due December 15th, but that's also an annual report. as well, but I can double check that for you. So that's-
Is there anything else that you want to hand off, Bill?
Yeah.
If anyone wants to sign on, I'd like to get it put in tomorrow.
Okay.
So we have time to look it over. If you don't want to sign it, it's fine.
Here are more copies.
Simple little bill.
Yeah, it's only a few pages.
Alexander's yours.
This is the sign up sugar set.
Let's get Senator approved.
I also did bring the draft of the reporting bill.
Oh, the justice.
Yeah, that just adds those reporting requirements. I can pass that
Are we
around.
ready to go out?
No, we can discuss that if you'd like.
And do we have mandatory minimums still in Vermont?
So there are, no, there's no
Okay.
mandatory. There are minimums and maximums. There's a range, but there's no, Vermont is a non-binding sentence.
Well, there are some sex offenders, right?
Right, yeah, I guess for certain.
I mean, sexual.
Yeah, certain offenses there are, so to correct myself, there are minimums. But there's no binding guidance, so there's discretion within the range. And the way that with the probation statute currently is that probation cannot exceed the maximum sentence of what the underlying crime would be.
Okay.
And that would still be maintained in this bill. It just establishes a presumption of probation for nonviolent felonies and misdemeanors,
And
for first-time offenders.
are we, I know we're tracking data on incarceration rates, but are we also tracking data on the sentencing process and whether or not that's being applied in an equitable way? You know, we're kind of looking at one end, but are we looking at,
There is the Vermont Sentencing Commission,
okay,
which I believe does examine those issues broadly. I'd have to get back to you on exactly what there's the specific information that they require. I do believe the Sentencing Commission actually sunsets this year, but it has been renewed a couple of times.
So we renewed it, we pushed for it last year.
But you've already signed off.
Actually, I have.
Oh, you-
That's the first time I've seen it.
So Ben, a quick question. There's a phrase that I've seen for when it comes to filing motions, you know, with it having to serve the interests of justice. Is that, I think that's historically just been a common law. Is that something that should be for a motion like this, if the state's filing a motion and presenting evidence requesting an alternative sentence? Is that something?
And the interest of justice is really sort of an amorphous term,
Yeah.
right? I think it's sort of, you know, on the one hand, it's good because it can adapt to each individual case, but on the other hand, that's really mean, right? And initially, and you'll see in other parts of this statute, even that the interest of justice is kind of pervasive, but that was discussed. But I think that the you know, Senator Sears, and you can speak to sort of the motive behind it, but it was decided not to include that, to have a more definitive standard and factors for the court to consider, and that's why those few factors that were listed off.
Subsections and, yeah, okay.
You know, like the victim, whether or not the use of a dangerous weapon, you know, whether coercion or threats were used in the underlying crime. It was viewed that those gave, you know, better consideration and more definitiveness for the court to consider, rather than sort of this more amorphous term. And it's not an exhaustive list. The way it's drafted is that it includes these, so it could include others potentially.
I think that, again, part of the goal in this bill is to create greater racial equity in sentencing. And we were afraid just putting in interest of justice wouldn't get us there. Geographic disparities in the state. So the attempt to be more directed.
And then, there is the process as well, just that if those factors are present, again, that it's not just probation for these offenses, no matter what. There is the ability that if there is a serious offense or an underlying factor within the commission of the crime, that the prosecutor does have the ability to overcome that presumption. And it was really important to give a process to that, where the prosecutor can present evidence, the defendant can present evidence arguing for presumptive probation, but then also having that be appealable immediately as of right to the Supreme Court. And then during that, the order would not. Because otherwise, there would have to be, if it wasn't appealable as of right to the Supreme Court, there would have to be a motion to do an interlocutory appeal, and that could be denied, and then the whole court process would have to play out before the defendant would potentially have relief.
And are we also planning to do a walkthrough on this bill at some
Oh,
point?
yeah.
Oh,
This is a mini
I
one.
would suggest probably, once we got it introduced into the Senate, we should probably schedule it for next week. Towards the end of the week, whatever the bill. And maybe you could do the other bill.
Yeah,
You want to hand the other bill up?
yeah.
I haven't seen it yet, so. And I'm gonna run down the hallway. Sorry, folks.
Sir, I do have the sign-up sheet as well.
I have that.
I have it right off the top,
Okay.
so.
I'll be right back.
And that's the reporting requirement bill.
And
Excuse me.
can you just give the rundown more time of which reporting bill?
Sure, so it's currently in statute, justice reinvestment reporting requirements. It was passed last year. This basically just adds additional reporting requirements for the effectiveness of justice reinvestment expenditures. So whether or not they're effective at reducing recidivism and crime, and if not, why? And then it goes into really assessments of where the specific violations will be broken down by civil or criminal in nature. Really an assessment of sort of the underlying reasons, if there are violations of probation, furlough, parole, what the nature of those violations are. And to help give a picture really to the legislators of why these initiatives are effective or why they're not, and really just to try and provide as much data to show
So
that.
this basically just gives us a bit more oversight as to whether things are working.
Right, and probably to give you information on any other.
Place potentially to ask for tracking of the savings from decarceration. Would that be germane to this reporting bill?
Potentially, that could also. So I think that could be rolled into this bill. It could also actions as well to try and establish a lineup for that as well within the budget or budget adjustment.
Okay.
Because that's how out-of-state bed savings initially, I think it was last year or the year before, that line item of out-of-state bed savings didn't exist. So it was really hard to track what the actual amount was. And so that could potentially be done with this as well.
Okay. Thank you.
This is my concern with the bill the whole time is you sign on to something that we haven't even gone over yet and kicked
And
around.
then it
And
can turn into something else.
well, I did that once last year. I said, $100 million bill. plus 200 megawatt. That's not-
I had a bill last year that I signed on to as it came out and voted no on once it was done, so.
You were able to move your name, right? It's
Yes.
not done often, but isn't that something that's,
Possible,
yeah.
So the only question I have on this one, now, this,
Yeah.
is we talk about, or the bill talks about creating greater racial equity within sentencing. How does this affect that?
So what it does is that it establishes probation as the presumptive, for lack of a better term, punishment rather than incarceration.
For all individuals charged with crime, correct?
For first-time offenders that are charged with non-violent misdemeanors and felonies,
Right, okay, so it's anybody charged with it.
if it's their first-time offense.
Okay, so
The the report, we could probably, well, is this draft been edited?
It would go to the editors when we're done.
We could probably schedule both bills the end of next week.
Yeah, because if, you know, everybody, if people sign on, or even if they don't, if it's finalized as far as who the sponsors are,
Yeah. Can
I would,
can you forward a copy to Senator Lyons and make sure Senator Bluth gets copies?
of just the reporting bill or both?
Both bills, because she's on the Justice Oversight Committee. I want to give her an opportunity to sign on if she wants. I don't know if there's other senators interested in it.
I think there'd be a handful who would be interested.
Okay,
If we go around, probably grab a few, or if we want to make more
yeah,
else.
no, what do I have to do?
Well, just, you know, it's your job to obtain the sponsors and, you know, get them to sign the sheet. And then you can submit that with the bill to drafting operations, or you can just give it to me and I'll do it too.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, just give it to me after you obtain the sponsors and I'll.
And they can email you too, right, if they want to be a sponsor.
They can, but since it's a physical sign out sheet, it really should
No,
be,
It's
yeah,
one or the other.
yeah, exactly. If it's a remote sign out sheet, basically you could just email me everybody that wants to sign on and I'll fill it out, but we just, it's hard to have two competing sheets sometimes, you know.
You know, I mean, I don't want to put pressure on people to sign bills out, so I just, and offer one person.
Well, I mean, you could just let me.
I just leave it at this, Senator Lyons and Senator Burris, this committee. I think I'll do that for now, for these two.
I'll send them an email with a copy of the bill and I'll copy
Yeah.
you on it.
I don't want to put, you know, Bob, you feel free to sign on or not, it's up to you.
No, no,
You don't-
the only problem I have with this, Senator Sears, is I would like to have the opportunity, like Nader said, to go over the bill.
Yeah, go
And
ahead.
say, yeah, this is good. No, I mean, the committee as a whole.
Oh, the committee
You're
will.
kind of backwards, you know, but you sign on to it and then they go to the building and go, oh, it's really not something that I kind of approve of.
Well, back
I'm not saying I approve or don't approve.
back for the 2000 session, a senator from Essex Orleans introduced a bill on domestic partnerships. And then the Vermont Supreme Court made its ruling in Baker that led to civil unions. And the senator from Essex Orleans at the time was scrambling because there was such outcry in the Northeast Kingdom. And he was successful in getting rid of the bill, but I always joke that Vince was about being the one that introduced it.
Oh, was that Vince?
He was ahead of his time and then he was behind.
Sometimes.
And he was on
happens,
this committee and stuck to deal with civil. And eventually voted no, so I guess there is a precedent. I always, was probably just an example of somebody being way ahead of their time, introducing the bill.
Well, Senator Sears, do you want to hold on to the sign out sheet in case?
Yeah,
There, okay.
both of them, I guess. I'll see something.
I just need more time to go through the other one. The small one, page 109 here.
Yeah, the small one's an easy one.
The small one's an easy one. That one's good. So,
Well, we'll hold it till tomorrow.
that would be great.
Tomorrow we're meeting in, where do we meeting?
Yeah, so we're meeting in the pavilion. It's down the pavilion. Down upstairs, second floor. It's room 270. When you get up there, there's signs that say room 270. So then we're gonna be scrambling, getting in there. I'm only gonna have a laptop, so hopefully we'll be able to start at 9:15. Because they don't have a
We're not
workstation.
scheduled to start tonight.
Yeah, 9:15. You'll need your badge to get there. You can just walk up the stairs or take the elevator. I'll bring notepads for everybody and agendas for everybody and pens for everybody. And name tags for everybody because the House Judiciary Committee will be with us as well. But anything else?
And we'll be identifying them. Because we have name tags.
They'll have name tags as well, nameplates, and I'll have nameplates for you guys.
Do we have a meeting with Representative Mond? Or is that next?
12:15.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
Oh,
Today? Might bring that or-
Yeah, good thing you remembered. Because I would have reminded you of that. And also, while I have your attention, if you don't mind.
No, not at all. But
We are gonna have an evacuation next Tuesday, I believe. And it's gonna be my responsibility to account for all of you guys. So I just sent you guys an email, if you can give me your cell phones. You know, we have to go to the pavilion, that's where we go. If you guys aren't here, that's fine, just go to the pavilion and then text me and let me know that you're out of the building. Or
We
somehow.
can't stay outside.
You can stay outside, you can do that if you want, text me, yep. Just let me know, because I'm the one that has to let them know they.
We're doing it in the morning.
I have no idea when, they're not telling us when it is.
Oh, because, yeah. And I would text you if I'm in approach.
Yes, yeah, still, let me know.
Okay.
So you're responsible for me no matter where I am.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's good to know,
And
right?
you can let the approach person know as well, you know, let us both know.
Are we gonna have a group text for all or so whoever?
Yes, and I was, yep, and I was just telling Representative Senator Bukowski, I personally don't use text much at all. You know, that we've actually been really just encouraged not to because of public records. In an emergency, certainly, but I'm not gonna be texting you guys information. You know, I would ask that you don't, Senator Sears and I text sometimes, but basically, we're gonna try and keep that to a minimum.
We're gonna stop doing that.
No, well, you and I can still text back and forth,
Oh,
but,
okay.
and it's only logistics, like, I'm gonna be 5 minutes late or something like that. Anything else, do not text me at all, because then they could,
Nothing policy wise.
yeah, because they could then ask for my personal phone records, and I don't want that to happen.
Well, while we're still discussing things publicly, Peggy,
Mhm.
why is Senator Mullins' February 2013 bill here?
I have
Is
no,
he here? Is
I have no idea, I did not put that there.
there something I'm supposed to do? Is he areas and out of bounds?
Not that I know of,
There's very good notes here that weren't written by me.
I have no idea, I saw that and I thought you put it there, and I was wondering.
No, I have no idea. He is out of bounds.
I think you did.
I think Senator Mullins is no longer. Thank you. So we're taking a break until 10:30 and coming back with